Thank you. Thank you, Girija, for that very warmly inflected introduction. Thank you, Sachida. I call Sachida the same way I call Joy Goswami Joyda. Thank you so much for this honor. It's truly an honor. I had the pleasure of actually looking at the film, the entire film from which we saw a couple of excerpts, which Anwar Ali has directed. And it introduced me, it gave me a great desire to know more about the work of this very significant poet. And one of the statements in one of the poems that he recited, because the full length came luckily with the subtitles, since I don't have Malayalam. And I was really struck by a couple of lines, which must be familiar to all of you in their original, where he writes, even when all the battles ended in truce, even when all language turned into translation, he left, planting seedlings for a future harvest. And Atul Ravi Verma, I believe, wrote it when another poet had passed. But this particular phrasing, when all language turned into translation, has sort of taken root in my own mind. And I know, I suspect that it will yield a future harvest, another way of thinking about translations as a possible transplanting from one fertile field to another. But for today, what I will do is I will be talking about, as Girija mentioned, the pleasures and the delights, which to keep me on track, I am going to just lead you through some supporting slides. But mostly what Sachida asked me to do was share some of the experiences I have had in my journey as an accidental translator. And as I acknowledge so many of my peers and my seniors, editor friends, poet friends, all the people who see translation for the rich act that it is, I wish also to acknowledge the multiple legacies that we are all inheritors of, and the pluralities that bind us despite what seems like the barriers of language. As an Anglophone writer, because that is what I am, I write in English, that is the primary language of my life, my literature, and yes, my love. That is the language with which I express my deepest emotions. But as that very Anglophone, avowedly Anglophone writer, it really was translation that revealed to me the extent of my essential Bengaliness. So in my talk, which I've titled Essential Subversions and Urgent Collaborations, I will touch very briefly upon the stages of my journey and how a very simple desire to translate my own delight in the poet Shukumar Rai grew into a lifelong need. Shukumar Rai, as many of you may know, was Satyajit Ray, the filmmaker's father. Translating him was pure joy. But translating the contemporary poet Joy Goswami was pure madness. I had to re-educate myself as I set out from language towards a second selfhood. Meanwhile, international translation workshops found me walking back across the bridge of English towards Bangla. From that duality of translator and text, a third possibility emerged, the collaborative mode, where in young Bengali poet Shubhro Bandyopadhyay's collaboration with the South African poet R.E. Sitas, my role was that of translator and editor. What holds all these different strands together is really a willingness to cross the invisible line. And that's why I think of translation as an essentially transgressive act, and collaboration as a way of sustaining what is a life-giving practice. And so I will begin with the first problem, the first challenge, and that is the problem of impossibility. I had been told Shukumar Rai was impossible to translate, and yet it had been done. It had been done by the very fine academic Shukanto Chaudhary. In fact, Shukumar Rai's own son translated a handful of them, very beautifully, very freely translated. But it wasn't until 1999 when my father presented to my non-Bengali husband, my husband is half Tamil and half Kannadiga. In 1999, my father-in-law presented to him an inscripted copy of Shukanto Das translation, saying, here's introducing you to the Bengali Lear. So you see Shukumar Rai there, and of course everyone recognizes Satyajit Ray. More than the Bengali Lear or the Bengali carol, Shukumar Rai was really a Bengali satirist. He was a maestro of a specific brand of nonsense verse and prose that also acted as subtle and overt criticism of Bengali stereotypes, and especially anglicized Bengali stereotypes, of which I was in very grave danger of becoming one myself. Before I knew how to read, I knew lines from Shukumar Rai. They were recited in our house. My father, who's also a poet, I've lost him recently, it's just 3 months. He had internalized a lot of Bengali poetry, and that is really what he passed on to me as another inheritance. So lines from Shukumar Rai, and this is not unusual in Bengal. People know these lines and they become part of everyday conversation, whether it is about bad smells, gandho shuke morte hobe, e abar ki allad, or about being a very, very gloomy and difficult to please Bengali. So all these kind of things, the Bengalis use it as a sort of shorthand for communication within their families. When I grew up, if ever that happened, I realized as an adult that what I missed in the current translation was the rasa. Now, all of us know what rasa is. This is something that is part of the aesthetic theory that we are all familiar with. There are 9 rasas. What I missed in the English versions, which were metrically perfect vehicles of the original content, was the rasa. And that rasa was what Shukumar Rai himself called the Khyal Rosh. And that translates in his own words as the rasa of whimsy. And in his introduction, when excerpts of it started coming out, because he never lived to see his work in book form, he did say that I place this Khyal Rosh in front of Bengali readers, and those of you who do not like it, feel free to reject it. So he had that kind of strength. But what I realized was that I had an instinctive memory of how those poems made me feel as a child. They had juiciness, they had bounciness, and they had a craziness about them. And I wanted these 3 things to somehow leap across the divide between Bangla and English. And the only reason I dared to do this was because I was very young and very foolish, and I had nothing to lose. I had no experience as a translator other than the everyday translation that is a sort of default setting in a multilingual country like ours. It was simply a challenge to my creative writing self, to the poet self in me. And that really led to Abol Tabol, the Nonsense World of Shukumar Rai, and which became my first published book. And 21 books later, I realized that I could never have taken on this impossible task if I hadn't been a happy fool. And this is the happy fool that Sukumar Rai invokes in the opening poem of Abol Tabol. I'll read just a bit of Bangla for you, where he says, Aire bhola kheyal khola, shopon dola nachiye aire pagol, abol tabol, motto madol, bajiye aye. And I translated this as, come happy fool, whimsical cool, come dancing, dreaming, fancy free. Come mad musician, glad glusician, beating your drum with glee. Come, oh come, where mad songs are sung without any meaning or tune. Come to the place where without a trace your mind floats off like a loon. And when he invites you, he invites everyone. Come, you travelers, to the world of babblers and the beat of impossible rhyme. So I thought I'd start today by actually starting at the beginning, which is how did I deal with these issues that came up as I was entering this world? Because the two main things that I had to kind of grapple with was not the naming of cats as T.S. Eliot was worried about, but the naming of characters. And the second really naughty problem had to do with sound. When I was listening to Sachida reciting, I was thinking, how much of poetry is contained in the sound? How do we move that one sound system into another sound system? And despite all my love for English and my dexterity in English, when I started translating Rai, I felt very severely limited by English. It was its essential formality which felt like a limitation. So if Bangla was a never-ending ripple, English felt like a closed fist that I had to crack open one finger at a time. I realized that what we call rather proudly and complicatedly onomatopoeia in English is utterly inadequate to the riotous range of sound words that are available in Bangla. So I despaired at the paucity of the English language, because in Bangla there are very evocative, and as most Indian languages have this, for practically every kind of situation and sensation. So for instance, the way the jelly or a belly will shake would be thol thole. The sound when you're eating a very crisp cucumber would be koch koche. And there would be so many examples, too numerous to share. So I was very keen that I should attempt this when I'm doing this enterprise, this mad enterprise. Therefore, to give you a couple of examples, Shobdo Kolpo Drum became Wordy Gurdy Boom. A character named Hiji Bij Bij became, in an example of straightforward translation, Gobbledygook, while another character, Heshoram Hushiar, became cautious Chuckleonymous in an attempt not only to convey both the meaning and the alliterativeness, but also, very importantly, the nonsensicality. And I felt pretty happy when I had delivered at least the effects that Rai's original had. And what were these effects? These were the effect on the eardrum, the effect on the gray cells, and the effect on the funny bone. I felt, oddly enough, rather sure-footed. I was really sure-footed because I was writing by ear. I had heard these poems growing up so often, I knew them from inside out. And I had listened long enough and attentively enough to the original sounds to be able to carry them into English. For instance, and this is of course a lovely poem called Khichuri, which is a great example of how he mishmashes language to create a new thing, which I won't read to you now. But this one, which is called The Old Crone's Home, I'll read a couple of lines from here. Mouthful of puffed rice, smiling and chomping, in a rickety, rackety house, a clickety crone is stomping. Bed full of cobby webs, head full of soot, inky, blinky, bleary eyes, back bent like a root. And so I kept going on. I kept going with the flow. I kept following the sound in a mad hope that somewhere the two systems would find a commonality. And I think it also helped that as a poet who was starting out, I was also very invested in rhyme schemes. That was something I loved to do. And when it came to moving on to choices, because I think a lot of you who are translators in the room will realize that so much that troubles us has to do with the choices we make when we are trying to translate. And I decided that if there was Bengali wordplay going on, then that is depending on multiple meanings, I will have to find something in English that is also playing with multiple meanings. And I'd love to give you an example because I think this is an example of being radical and fearless, which alas, I think I am no longer. But there is a very interesting section in Hojobodolo, which is a story that he wrote, which has poetry in the middle of it. And at one point, there's a beautiful riff on the Bangla word for yam. Okay, so there are many kinds of yams, and the person just uses that very effectively in this conversation. But I realized that if I translated yam into yam, no matter how many biological variants I found, the effect would be as unfunny as walking into a room and telling the punchline first. So what I decided was I took a decision to change the key word. And instead of yam, because I am what I am in English, would only make me think of the cartoon character Popeye. That was not going to help me very much. So what I did is I took a decision to use the word case, and this is how it goes. The owl opened his bleary eyes, looked all around him, closed his eyes, and pronounced, "Let the complaint be made." With a great effort and astonishing speed, the crocodile put on a weepy expression, digging his nails into his face, produced a few measly crocodile tears. Then, in a hoarse voice, he said, "Your Honor, Justice incarnate, this is a libel suit. Therefore, first, we must understand what a suit is. A suit is a case. Cases are very useful things. You get them in different kinds: suitcases, briefcases, glass cases, spectacle cases, bookcases, etc. Suits are kept at the bottom of a suitcase. Therefore, it is essential that we get to the bottom of this case." He had only got this far when a turbaned jackal leapt up and said, "Your Grace, suits are useless things. Eat a woolen suit and your throat tickles. Tell someone suit yourself and they get offended. Whoever eats a suit, only pigs and porcupines." And I felt that everything that he was trying to do, because even in certain yams, when you eat it, it tickles your throat, but all of it works only if in the Bangla. It doesn't transport itself with that kind of faithful equivalence. Similarly, for other things, idiomatic usage of Bengali, like all our languages, is sometimes very culturally specific, is sometimes even region specific. There's one example which gave me a bit of grief. In Bangla, the idiom is "Nara bel tolay jay kobar." Okay. Now, "Nara bel tolay jay," simply, if you translate it very literally, means the bald man goes to the wood apple tree. And the suggestion, if somebody says this in a conversation, it means how absurd. Because it's really questioning, why did he go there? The assumption is the bald man went to the wood apple tree because he was waiting for the fruit to fall in order to oil his non-existent hair. So the entire idiom suggests a kind of folly. And what Rai does is, he knows this is what the phrase means, but he's more interested in adding another layer, which is how many times does the bald man go to the wood apple tree? So translating this literally would no doubt have created a complicated nonsensicality of its own, but would fail to convey the naturalness of an immediate and idiomatic understanding of folly. And so what I did again here is I chose another idiom in English, which is a wild goose chase. Everybody knows what a wild goose chase is. And the question, the formulation is, where did they go? Where did they go on this wild goose chase? It strikes me now when I look back at things I did exactly 22 years ago, is that I hadn't, at the time that I was doing this, I hadn't read Umberto Eco's Mouse or Rat translation as negotiation. But already that is what I was doing. I hadn't read Robert Bly's 8 Stages of Translation. But already I was aware that what I was striving for was the living tone, so that in English the lines could be spoken with the buoyancy of someone living it in the present moment. So here the subversion that was taking place, which of course becomes clear to me only in hindsight. One, I was encroaching on very fiercely guarded terrain. Bengalis are very protective of Sukumar Rai, and disinclined to trust the possibility of a satisfactory translation. Two, I was ignoring the prohibitory signs that are set up around a text that say trespassers shall be prosecuted. I ignored the sign, I broke in, I walked on the grass, I scribbled everywhere, I brought my knapsack full of contraband, and I pitched a tent that I had stitched from the cloth of my own practice of being a poet in English. I was what they call in American English a happy camper. And I hoped that everyone who joined me inside this trespassed enclosure would be happy too. As I said, I don't think I'll ever return to that kind of free-spirited fearlessness. In fact, I know that I cannot return to that free-spirited fearlessness. But what I do know, and this is something that I didn't understand, these are some of these delicious illustrations that Sukumar Rai used to add to his poems. The thing that I did not know until I began translating Joy Goswami was that subversion is a much deeper and a much more dangerous thing. And that's because the second challenge that the entire project is throwing at you is that of inviolability. Nothing I realized was sacred, and yet everything was. I think it's this dichotomy that everything is sacred and yet nothing is sacred that one has to find a balance between. In order to translate Joyda's poetry, I had to re-educate myself in a way that was as much textual as it was contextual. I had to translate, not just read, I had to translate entire essays written by Joyda on the poets that made him, on the poets he read and admired, so that I could inhabit the poems that I was translating with that inner knowledge that was so intuitive and inherited for him, and which had to be so autodidactic and difficult for me. I had to shapeshift into a variety of selves and registers. I had to time travel into the devotional songs of the 18th century Shakto poet Ram Prasad Sen. I had to also travel into the world of Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. That's the kind of poet Joyda is. I had to understand how the world of Rilke's poetry reached Ranaghat, the small Mufassil town in Bengal where Joyda grew up. I had to find the right language that would contain, yes, but also convey the intoxicating stupors of Lord Shiva, for instance, in a book-length sequence called Moutat Moheshwar. I had to listen to that other tonality as much as uh, the multiple frequencies of Jatra Pala, the theatrical performances that were very much a part of Joyda's upbringing, radio commentaries, public announcements, all of that was entering Joyda's poetry. Directly, tangentially, subtly, everything was there, and I had to find a way of transmitting it. Could I become an able transmitter? I was about to find out. I had to grow new skins, and I had to learn how to wear them well in English. I once found myself saying to someone in an interview, when I'm translating, that's me speaking differently. And that's actually what happened. But now I'll quickly give you some examples to show that, Joyda's poems, especially the first book that I translated, Shurjo Pora Chhai, which originally I had translated as The Ashen Sun, which certainly sounds better, but it's not as accurate as ashes burnt by the sun, which is what it actually means. So they looked very light. If you can see on the left, you can see the Bangla words. There is a sort of light oral, there's a lot of white space, there's very sparse punctuation, and yet there is the weight of multiple cultural reference. And some of those references inevitably fall through the net of translation. So in one of it's a favorite poem of mine only because I had to struggle so much with it. There is a reference to Joro Bharat Shantan. And while most readers would be attuned to the story of Bharat, who was so attached to his previous life as a faun that he was sluggish, inert, and dull in his life as a human, that would be impossible to communicate in the English poem without turning the poem into a treatise. So my first translation, I had used the phrase senseless child, which, as Joyda gently and firmly pointed out, was not quite it. After several deliberations, I came up with idiot child. Here I was hoping that all the associations in English, the archetypal, the mystical imagery of the holy fool, or the unkind, the cruel imagery of the village idiot, Dostoevsky's idiot, the wise, the savant, all of that would resonate in a way not similar but parallel to the original. Over the years, though, the longer I lived with the poem, it became clear to me that idiot wasn't the solution either. Some element of the dumb animal had to be conveyed, a sluggish, unthinking human animality, and it was in the word bovine that I found both elements. And I lived with that, and I was happy to let it into print. In another example, and so you see on the roof the bovine child, and then it carries on. There's a very interesting example because I think this also shows what falls through the net of translation. Until you create, maybe it's like trapeze artists, you have to find a way of catching them as they are falling. And here what happened, in the original Joyda writes, Ghore eshe dhoke otit, talgol pindo, pinder moton bhobishyot. Now this is clearly anchored in the knowledge that pindo is this ritualistic offering of rice to one's ancestors in Hindu funerary rites. So in an earlier draft, I had actually exercised a kind of circuitous strategy by sneaking in a reference to the ancestral and compressing the cumulative meaning of the original to arrive at the line, the past enters the room, a great orb, ancestral like the future. But what I put it away. And what I ended up putting into the book happened because I again went back to the source. A lot of translation for me involves revisiting, not shunting the original away and saying, now I'm over and done with it. maybe months or even years later, revisiting the source, trusting both myself and the sequencing of the original line more. And so what I finally did was, the past enters the room, a jumbled rice ball like food offerings to ancestors, the future. And what I really liked about this was I was able to culminate my English line in the same place where the Bengali line culminates. So there's Bhobishyot and there's future. This doesn't happen very often. It happened here also because of the way Joyda chops up his lines. And as one line slides into another, through that slide and slipping, the meaning comes through. There's another very, very favorite example of mine of the poet at play. So here Joyda is writing, Aaj ki nishchit, ki biddut, ki horin ei doud, ki prantor, ki ude jawa bali ei hat, ki moyur ei nritto. Now in Bangla, the phrase doesn't give me any trouble at all. What he's done is he's used the word moyur, which is a noun. He's used it as an adjective to describe the peacock's dance. And there was no way, I could not find a solution. I could not say how peacock this dance. I could not say how peacockian this dance. That would be terrible. So the rest of it was like a stone. It was like a boulder in the middle of my path. And the whole poem is flowing merrily around that boulder, and I am stuck. So I put it away, and just by pure chance, I have this habit of going through thesauruses and dictionaries and etymological books, etc. And I discovered a wonderful word which is used to describe a stately 16th century Spanish dance. And that word is pavian. And that word apparently signifies the resemblance to the movements of a peacock. That dance apparently resembles the movements of a peacock, and I just had my solution. What I did then, the entire poem resolved itself. Today, how certain, how sudden, how dear swift this race, how vast, how blown away sand this hand, how pavian this dance. How well deep, how closed room, how tongue out this envy, how inevitably grave-like each hole, and each persistently pursuing ghoul, how suddenly sunk. Today, how urgent this verse, which even the devil would not dream of buying. So, with this, I realized that I just had to sometimes let time be my co-translator and wait and not be in a terrific hurry. Joyda adores what we call portmanteau words, compound words. And in some of them, for instance, the first one you see there, Gachera Janmandhu, which actually means trees blind born. I couldn't do more than that. The next one, which is Nok Chonchu Paloker Dhongsho Oboshesh. And he's compressed that whole thing that became the wreckage of claw, beak, feather. And sometimes, Ashtabokro, the third word that you see on the screen there, refers to an ancient sage whose body is deformed in 8 places. I could not. There I said, I cannot. I will just write deformed, and I will put a note at the end. So sometimes, in English, compression or evasion become strategies of solving. Sometimes what happens is a word like tomosha. There's a beautiful line Joyda has where he says, Tomosha amar shima jol, which I translated as darkness, my limits are water. But we all know that the reference here is not only to darkness, it's also the river by which Valmiki had his first poetic inspiration. So these were the ways in which I started learning how to lose. If Shukumar Rai had taught me how to succeed, Joyda, a lot of it was, how can I lose? How can I lose with flair? How can I fail better? How can I crack poetry that is code? How can I maintain the shape of lines without warping the meaning? And how can I utilize grammar when I know that grammar is not going to help me? It was while I was working on Joyda's Shurjapura Chai that I was compelled to write a poem called Translations in order to understand what was going on. And I'm going to just read you the last paragraph of that, where I write, there's no explanation for madness. From the place where listening becomes a movement towards sound, I am following the traces. Quicksilver, joy, sadness, trawling for the word that will be exact and unmerciful, that will be synonymous with truth. Parallel worlds running out of words, and still they come, whisper vagrant, sharp with homing beaks and feathers, landing without pulling in their claws. There are no laws in this land of doubles. I must make my own, and when I am caught for trespassing, I will know I have crossed the line, invisible to all, but those whose eyes are flame, tending already to cinder. And I think this admission of defeat and this admission of finding new ways to triumph became very clear to me when I sort of shifted my frame to work with international poets. And there was a poet, Bill Herbert, who writes in English as well as in Scottish. And at one of our translation workshops, I remember I thought I'll translate his poem Hieroglyphic into Bangla. And it was one particular word I stumbled at, and that word was hawk. And I, in my very bookish Bengali way, had translated it as Shennopokhi, which is the word you see on the top left. But Shennopokhi is so multisyllabic, it doesn't have that force of the hawk. So I called up Joyda. And he said to me, he recited the line from one of his poems, and he said, Lohar Baj Pakhi Tomake. Baj Pakhi is the word for hawk. It is the colloquial, more used, certainly the word that a poet would use. Baj Pakhi as hawk becomes, for me, it's also interesting for me because Baj means, in Bangla, means thunderbolt or bolt of lightning. So imagine the hawk falling out of the sky like a bolt of lightning. Shennopokhi just doesn't cut it. So thanks to Joyda, I found that both my worlds were collaborating on their own. And as I would puzzle over lines, I was already discovering the limits of my other self, my other language. And as I said in the beginning, it was only through translation that I could hear myself speaking in Bangla again. It was only by following the lines put there by somebody else could I find my way back home. And that way back home is really the way back to the Bengali that is my inheritance. I will quickly tell you a little bit about the astonishing experience I had in 2009 at a residential workshop, my first ever, where just for fun I took up one of the Gaelic poets' poems. I think because it resonated with me, it was all about having overdone everything. And it felt like me. And one night I just sat and I started translating into what I realized was a kind of Bengali patwa. And I was thinking, what am I doing? I'm not even the person supposed to do this. I'm the editor here. I'm not a translator in this workshop. I was wondering, is this the effect of too much alcohol? Is it Amar Glashe Beshi Beer, which is one of the lines in the poem? Is it Amar Beshite Boro Beshi? Amar agune legeche agun, ami oshusto, which is simply too much of a muchness is too much for me. My fire is on fire and I'm sick. I realized that I wasn't sick, except only in the healthiest way, where you come out and you have a new perspective on life and you realize inside me all the Bangla that I had willfully spent my childhood ignoring in Darjeeling had gotten to me through osmosis. Everything I had ignored in my bilingual parents' home was now inside me and was now insisting on coming out. That experience changed me fundamentally. It actually unsettled me. It made me feel like somebody else, as if somebody else was speaking all the words I thought I had forgotten. After the workshop, I found myself writing a very long poem. It was called Five Different Words for Love. I was trying to decode what that translation experience meant to me. And as often happens, I don't write an essay when I'm thinking about translation, I often write poetry. And in that poem, for the first time ever, I put these 5 Bengali words in my English poem and I did not translate them. The words are Bondhu, Bhai, Bhagavan, Bhaboghure, and Bhalobasha. And these are the 5 different words for love, which is simply friend, brother, God, vagabond, and love. And here I'm translating it, but in the poem I don't, because I feel sometimes there is a secret core that one must hold on to as one navigates these very revealing exercises that we engage in. And also I was creating a kind of secret garden to which I could return when I needed to reorient myself to this difficult place. I would really like to just end this part about inheritance because it's a little bit about coming full circle. In Aberystwyth, Sachida will remember this workshop very well. We were in the little Welsh town of Aberystwyth, and I had come prepared with a translation of the young Welsh poet Eirig Salisbury's poem Kinhaned Lesson. Now, Kinhaned is a kind of extremely intricate, traditional, metrical Welsh poetry that is very difficult to write. Eirig is one of the masters at that poetry. He also teaches it to school children. So this poem was about teaching Kinhaned to school children. Before the workshop, I had been sent a non-rhymed, non-metrical English translation. In essence, I had received a paraphrase. So what I took into the workshop was a paraphrase. But when I heard Eirig reading it, he read it in Welsh. He read it, again, it's a very beautiful melodic language. And after I saw the patterns in the original, I realized how I would translate it. I would translate it into the kind of rhymed verse that my favorite Shukumar Rai would have written. And thus, while attempting to be faithful to a very foreign form, I ended up using a very intimate form. It felt right. And as John Ciardi, one of the translators of Dante's Divine Comedy, says, what can a poet trust more than the feel of the thing? And from here, I'll go to the last point that I'd like to share today, and that is, what is the challenge when you are asked to intervene? So far, all the projects have been self-motivated, self-driven, or commissioned. In a poetic sense, where you are involved somehow from the start. In the case of published poetry, the start is often the poem that is out there in the public domain already. In 2021, my young friend, the Bengali poet Shubhra Bandyopadhyay, asked if I would play editor in his collaboration with the South African poet. And when he asked me this, I was a little concerned because I didn't want to come in as a a kind of bossy outsider who said this is all wrong and we'll have to start again. I wanted to keep that, crossing the line has to also be done very delicately and very, very gently. And though this was an invitation to cross the line, I wanted to somehow make sure that the sanctity of the collaboration between the two poets was retained. And the reason I was troubled was because Shubhro had already done English versions of his poems from Bangla for Ari to respond to. So he made, the first word you see on that screen is khoshra. I really love that word. It simply means a sketch, a rough sketch. And to me, it sounds like the rough scratching of a nib on paper. So he made a khoshra, which is basically a rough version. And Ari took that version in English, and Ari writes in English. So he responded with his English-speaking, writing, reading mind. So I was thinking, what do I do now? Should I read Shubhro's roughs? Should I read his original? Should I read Ari's responses? I was completely lost. So when I'm lost, my answer is always go to the original. I read Shubhro's originals and I started again. And I started again, I translated each and every one of them again before going back and cross-checking and seeing if I had missed out anything. And when I was doing this, I realized what was missing in that process, which was essentially a way to work rather than the work itself, was the second word you see on the screen, which is Jotilota. Jotilota is simply density, complexity of language, thought, and construction, all of which Shubhro revels in. And none of that had entered the working versions. And it's when I made peace with this process, when the whole thing was ready, I was happy, we had talked it all over, and I was thinking, what can I say in my translator's note that does not feel false? I came upon, again, a word that saved me, and the word was interloper. Interloper comes from the word landloper. In the early 1500s, English speakers used landloper to signify the vagrant, the one who runs about the land. The loper came from Middle Dutch and Old English, and loper simply meant to run or to leap. And I realized this is an idea I can live with. I don't like the idea of being a meddler, but the idea of a leaper, even a vagrant, is dovetailing very much with my feeling of translation as an essential transgression. And when I was writing that note for the book, I was thinking what readers are receiving is not the Ur text that was really the foundation of this collaboration. And I asked myself, was this a kind of violence? Was this a blank? And was it false to the original exchange? Or were the new translations simply a truer bridge built for a new traveler, the reader who was not the first reader of those poems, Ari, but the reader? So was I perhaps making a new bridge for a new traveler to cross into into Shubhro's Bangla universe? I like to think that they were. Shubhro's very able makeshifts enabled me to make a further shift so that the reader could now stand where Ari had once stood, both inside the process and outside the original, occupying the same yet altered space. Could I see this as anything as a double erasure? I asked myself in skeptical mode. The erasure of the language, which is Bangla, the erasure of the process, which is provisional. Could I see it as a double take? Could translation be a delayed reaction to a surprising situation? Could translation be like Borges wrote in his short story, Pierre Menard, the author of Don Quixote? Could it be a form of rewriting that arrives eventually at the same place? And while asking these, I realized that two things about translation. One, which I've said before, and it's pretty obvious, but I realized it afresh, a poem is not a précis. Two, and this was an unnerving truth, the false can sometimes be true of translation. Because already by replacing one language with another, we are concocting. Sound is transformed, syntax is spun around. What was rounded becomes spiky, what was short becomes longer. All that remains of veracity is intention and ability. And I think one of the delights, because I've spoken a lot about the problems, but the delights are multiple, and one of the delights of doing this exercise was the bilingual delight of seeing how words had also transmuted in this exchange. So sometimes Shubhro's English would find a place in Ari's English, and sometimes Shubhro would tuck into his response something that came to him from Ari. So, for instance, he translated the third word you see there, Dakini. Shubhro translated it as necromancy. And then I realized that Ari is using necromancy to feed it back to Shubhro. A word like pamphlet, which was there in Shubhro's English version, is a word that Ari caught and he played with it. But when I went to the original, I realized what Shubhro was saying was not pamphlet as the tool, but pamphleteering as the activity. So I really love these instances, these discoveries of mucking about. And I realized that very often translation, even for, I think, the two of them when they were collaborating, I was a kind of third, like a tangential collaborator. And one of the things that made me feel very happy about this was how very often collaboration was a pretext for return, whether it's returning to the original or returning to the source or returning to a prior source of inspiration. Ari's riverine contemplations counterpointed Shubhro's archetypal Majhi, the boatman. And in Shubhro, the Majhi is not a metaphor. In Shubhro's world, the Majhi is really, now he has a carbon kayak. And I was wondering, from the famous golden boat, Shonat Tori of Tagore, to Shubhro's carbon kayak, I wondered to myself, I asked myself what rapids had been crossed. Because if every broken thing is music, so too all breakage is song. If austhir, the word you see on the bottom of the screen, if austhir is unstable, so too is it frantic. And in this doubling was the delight, in the interloping was the leap. Thank you very much.